Hello, everybody. I was sitting here today. It's Easter Monday here as I record this, so it's a public holiday here in Australia. And I was sitting here going to read some stuff up on my portable digital recorder because I want to do some more recording to it. And there were a few settings that I didn't understand. And so I was, pulled out the manual, and here it is, to look up some stuff. Now, on one hand, it's great. I mean, some products come and they have something, one page in various different languages, and it's very little. You've actually got to go online. This does have a comprehensive manual, a lot of stuff in it. But while I was sort of going to open it up and look at it, I noticed, of course, how small the print was on it. Now, I know that when they develop a product and they've got to package it and send it out, and there's costs associated with that, and you don't want a box to become too large with a big thick manual in it, or a bigger manual. So you make it small, you make the text small, it fits into a much smaller box. But if you have an accessibility issue, if you have in particular a visual issue, this becomes a real nightmare because you can't read it basically. So you need to grab a magnifying glass and try and read it, or you basically just throw it and search online, and hopefully someone's done a video, or hopefully someone's put something up in a larger format. And I actually went online to Zoom, and they do have online manuals, and I thought, oh, maybe they've got something much larger. But no, they basically did a PDF version of this at the same size, at the same font size. So even though I downloaded it and I sent one page to print, it was still the same. I can blow it up on the screen, I guess, magnify it on the screen, but it really, I'm using this as an example, and I'm not really just blaming Zoom. I'm talking about a lot of cases where the term accessibility is bandied round at times, but it just becomes a word, a meaningless word, because people don't, and companies don't often think about, when they're producing a product, how can someone who hasn't got 100% vision or other disabilities, how can they navigate the product? And another example is if you look at the PC market, and how often do you go into a shop and you're looking at a range of, say, desktop, that's mini towers or whatever, and they're black, shiny black boxes, and all the buttons are black. And it may look aesthetically pretty. Someone, in the design area said, doesn't this look cool? Black is the new colour. And they produce them like that, and they don't think, well, how do people get to see the buttons? And in particular, a lot of times, particularly mini towers, they end up under a desk somewhere where the light is low anyway. And they don't have, a colour. They don't think of accessibility. They think of a cheap, monochrome, one shade of black or grey or whatever. All the buttons are a similar colour, or they're sort of so indented in that you can hardly see them, because they don't want it to make the shape of the box look bad. So they look at it more as a sort of a fashion statement rather than an accessibility statement. So I guess that's my gripe, is that when you're doing and building things, creating things, and you may not know exactly who it's going for, but you must presume that some of the people that buy your product or read your documents are not going to have 20/20 vision, far from it. And I'm sure there are other people out there who may be watching this video who are nodding their head. They've got other accessibility issues, such as mobility issues, cognitive issues, and they're forgotten as well. I mean, yes, there are some companies out there that do work hard to make things accessible. I mean, Apple does a great job with the iPhone of having a whole suite of tools in the background that can help people with visual disabilities navigate the iPhone. But there are still many places where it's not thought about. It's more, this looks really beautiful in black, or this looks really beautiful in whatever colour, and there's no thought to how do people navigate it? How do people access it? How do people view it? It's the same even in education and training. I go back to a story that I've mentioned to friends of mine, a number of times over the years. As I say, I have a visual disability, and I can remember, all through my days at primary school and secondary college, that when notes were handed out from a teacher, when stuff was printed out. Now I remember, in my day, because I'm old, photocopiers were still fairly rare. There were Xerox machines and various other things, but there was no thought about making the font size or making the text larger for me, because even though in those days I wore the big bottle top glasses that looked like the two Coke bottles, nobody thought about it. No one gave it a second thought. And I was also to blame, because as a kid, you tend to not want to cause problems. You don't want to put your hand up and say, "Miss, I can't see this. Can you please this?" So you suffer through it. You either can't read it and don't read it, and what happens is you're just forgotten. And in some cases, it affects your education. And because people don't consider your disability, your visual disability, they may consider that, oh, well, he's just a slow learner, or he's slow at picking something up. No, he just doesn't see it because nobody took the time to actually, even though they knew he had glasses, even though they knew he had a visual disability, nobody took the time to actually, create some documentation, create some printed material in a font size that he could see comfortably. And that flows on to adult education. And I digress from my original story, but I'd done a number of training courses over the years, and sat in the classroom where a trainer had, come around and handed out, printed material, and it was all the same size for all the same, for the people in the class, for the students. And in some cases, it's not the trainer's fault, because the trainer may not have been made aware beforehand that, in my case, I had a visual disability. So the trainer had no idea. So the trainer was just, printing out the material that trainer prints out each time he or she runs a class. But in this one example, which sort of changed my view of things and made me a lot more open to sort of standing up for my rights and saying, hey, this is not good enough. A trainer who I'd only just met was handing out the notes, and suddenly when she got to me, she handed out notes in a much larger font size. And I was almost stunned, because that had never happened to me in probably, I was over 30 in those days, in all my life, in primary school, secondary college, and sort of adult training, that someone had taken the time to print out an extra copy in a much larger font size. And she looked at me and she sort of commented that I looked a bit, confused or something about it. And I explained that to her, and she said, well, I saw on your enrolment form that you have a visual disability, so that's what I did. It shouldn't be something that I was surprised about. It should be something that you're familiar with, that you're used to, that happens all the time. But it was such a revelation. And sort of from that moment on, I suddenly thought, well, I'm no longer going to sit around, whether I'm in classes or whether I'm outside, and just accept the fact that I have to put up with that, and that I have to suffer because no one has taken the time, even for 5 or 10 minutes, and worked out that, yes, Daryl or whoever it is has a visual disability. We should make sure either they've got a seat at the front, or that they've got access to notes that they can see. And it's a simple thing. Now, as I said earlier, sometimes it's not the trainer's fault. A trainer may not be given that information. A good trainer too will look at a class list and say to the administration, wherever they're working at, is there any issues I need to be made aware of? Does any of the students, have they notified you that they have some sort of issue that they need? But sometimes in the rush, and trainers, are rushed off their feet at times, that doesn't happen. But the reason for my video, if you're in a similar situation to me, and you have some form of disability, visual or whatever, and you're training, you're a student, you're doing something, what you need to do is stand up and make a statement about it. Don't sit back and just accept what you're given, and try and suffer through not being able to see it properly, getting sort of headaches through eye strain, or just giving up. You've paid or whatever to do a course, you're entitled to the consideration that if you have some sort of disability, particularly a visual disability, that the institution, the place will provide the resource material for you in a format that you can read comfortably. And so that was a revelation for me. I know for some of you out there, you might go, oh, isn't that just a normal thing? But it isn't. A lot of times you just accept that you don't want to be the troublemaker in the class. You don't want to cause issues. So you sit there and you say, oh, okay, that's the way it is. And so that's why when sometimes you hear people who are very advocacy, stand up for the rights of people with disabilities, and then you hear other people saying, why are they complaining all the time? Why do they want this? Why do they want that? Why does that person in a wheelchair want to be able to gain access to the shop? Why are they complaining that there are steps and stairs and stuff? Why don't they just, go away? Well, if it wasn't for those sort of people, if it wasn't for advocates that railed against that, we'd still be living in the dark ages when it came to accessibility. And when you think about it, if you've got a mobility disability, if you're in a wheelchair, you still have a right, if you're in a shopping centre, to be able to access shops. It shouldn't be that because you're in a wheelchair, you can't access that shop. Now, there are old buildings and stuff where ramps have not been installed and that, but in general, if people are building new buildings, new facilities, they need to be aware of the accessibility implications and build that into them. Now, in some jurisdictions, that's a law now, that you have to do those sorts of things under planning controls and everything else, that you have to build accessibility in. And even then, you still get people complaining, saying, why are they building that? Why is it more expensive? Why do we have to put this in for people in wheelchairs? The fact is, people in wheelchairs are citizens, and they have an equal right to access a shop or an office just the same as someone who's on two good feet, two good legs. And if you're sitting out there shaking your head saying, oh, it just adds extra cost to things, and and it stops people developing stuff, think for yourself. You may be totally fit at the moment, walk around, run, do everything, but who knows what happens in the future, whether you have an accident, whether you get arthritis or some other form of disease, whether old age catches up with you, and you'll be happy that people stood up and fought for the rights of people with disabilities to have the same access, the same quality of access to life, because you might be in that situation yourself. You live long enough, you live into your old age, you're going to have some sort of mobility issue, you're going to have some sort of visual issue, hearing issue, whatever. So that was my rant and my grumble today. As I say, I used Zune a little bit, probably a little bit unfairly, but that's an example of we've got to rush something, put something out, but we've got to put it in a small box or whatever, so we can't make it large enough for people with a visual disability to see. But what they could have done is they could have put a link onto the website and said, here is a much larger version of that document. It's not perfect because some people don't have the internet, but it would have given an opportunity for people to download a visual friendly version instead of this tiny version. So that's it. So when you're thinking about accessibility, when you're thinking about, why are they putting ramps in this shop? Why do they have to go through this added expense? Think about it for a fact that there, but with the grace of God go you, because you might have perfect health, you might have 20/20 vision, you might be able to run and jump and do everything. But there will come a time, if you live long enough, that you will be affected by something. Very few people go right through to the end of a long life and not have some issue, some health issue, some accessibility issue. And you will then be very happy that people stood up at that time and fought to give you the opportunity to continue to live a worthwhile life with dignity. And I think that's all it is. So that's it. End of rant. What do you think about accessibility issues? Do you think there's still a long way to go, or do you think that we've made, great bounds in the last few years? If you do, just whack something in the comments section below.